as they go through the programmatic experience, which is 4 phases, throughout that programmatic experience, all participants receive in-house therapy. Trauma and the behavioral manifestation of trauma is an explanation for what occurred. It is not an excuse, and I hold them accountable on a regular basis. We can hold them accountable and engage in healing at the same time. Sometimes also folks have not necessarily connected the dots enough to put language on it. I mean, even us, right? Like everybody in their healing journey, you don't always have language to put on what's going on in there.
What drives someone to change the world? Welcome to Social Trailblazers, where we seek to answer just that question. Join Kelly Hernandez, CEO of Nonprofit Marketing Nerd, as she interviews leading social innovators and nonprofit changemakers. This podcast is brought to you by DonorBox, the easiest way for nonprofits to rock their online donations.
In this episode of Social Trailblazers, I am so thrilled to be joined by Alia Berry, a community-based social worker, consultant with Seeds and Berries, and founder of the Village Revival Project. Alia has dedicated over 24 years to working with individuals from all walks of life, from young children to those navigating the criminal justice system. Her passion for addressing the root causes of violence through a trauma-informed and healing-centered approach has truly transformed the way communities deal with conflict and reentry. In this episode, Alia and I will be diving deep into her work and the founding of the Village Revival Project, more specifically focused on her experience supporting individuals before, during, and after incarceration. Make sure you listen to the end of this episode where Alia talks specifically about the Village Revival Project and how art is used as a tool for social cohesion in communities impacted by violence. Welcome, Social Trailblazer Alia Berry.
Leah, I am so excited to have you here. I'm a big fan of your work. And I'd love to, I know you have a pretty extensive, I was looking through your LinkedIn a little bit, you have a pretty extensive and diverse career making social impact. So first, thank you for being a social trailblazer. And then what kind of first inspired you to help others? That's what your career is.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity just to sit down and have this conversation. So yes, over the past 24 years, I've been working with ages 0 to 75 years old. I'm in a variety of settings, from daycares to schools to correctional facilities, a whole bunch of different places doing different things. And so where it kind of all started was 24 years ago. I volunteered in a summer camp in North Philadelphia, which ironically was called the Village of Arts and Humanities. I just made that connection recently as to like when I was 17 years old. It was a theatrical. They do a whole bunch of different like art-based healing modalities. To this day, they're still located there. But it was called the Village, and it was arts and healing. And I was a 17-year-old volunteering for a summer camp, and so that really opened my eyes to, just community work and community healing and art-based. And then me just personally, like within my own trauma story, I have had feelings of rejection or misunderstood, unheard, unseen, harmed as a fragile person. And so I have that in common with those that I serve, and I feel them on that level. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I know a little bit of your career and work, but it takes a certain kind of person that decides to step into that space and come alongside others. And I know there's so many people that are appreciative for the work you do. And, you are at MSW, LSW, which is, you started doing kind of community-based work, it sounds like, and then transitioned into social work. How do you think that initial community-based work has really shaped who you are as a clinician, as a social worker?
Yeah. So, the transition, when I was working in that summer camp, I wanted to be a teacher. And that's what I thought I wanted to be when I grew up. So I applied to school to be a teacher. I became a special education teacher. And then throughout teaching, I was doing community-based like activism and work and things like that. However, one of my students, he was in 8th grade. We graduated him from 8th grade, and by the next January, he was killed. And his name was Raheem Neal. And so I realized that my life nor the lives of those I serve are promised. And I also felt like, teaching academics, it was not really the priority at that point point to me and my heart. And I probably was a social worker the whole time. Maybe some of my teaching colleagues would say that, right? And so I then pursued my master's to transition from teaching to social work. And my master's was dedicated to Raheem. The way I transitioned into then doing community-based violence intervention and prevention work was I then really quickly realized that although I was doing this anti-violence work as an activist that was more macro level, community-wide, it became clear to me that like in order to stop violence, we have to pour resources into those who are causing the violence. Like if we don't address them, then like violence will persist. And so in my master's, my internship was focused on perpetrators. And I wasn't always the most popular one in class because in the social work class, it's mostly like, child abuse and victim abuse and victim, right? So, but I was clear that, the perpetrators had been victimized as well. And I started working corrections at that time and have been working with this population ever since.
Yeah. And I know, like most nonprofit founders, which you are, and we'll get into that a little bit more, like most nonprofit founders, you are already doing the work and seeing the problem that needs to be solved. And it kind of, you naturally get into create the nonprofit and they're like, oh, this is a thing and it needs to exist beyond me. And I know you are the founder of the Village Revival Project. Well, what is that?
Yeah, the Village Revival Project is it's an art-based nonprofit where we work to humanize the relationship between those who have caused violence and their surrounding communities. So that's really our mission statement. But what it is that we do is we're trying to revive the collective heartbeat of the community. It's clear that like we are not breathing together. Even the kinds of violence, the frequency of violence, the intensity of violence, like we are not on one accord and breathing together. And because I have worked on both sides of harm, so like I have worked with those who have caused violence for 15 years, but I also work with individuals such as moms who have lost their children to gun violence. I have worked, with gunshot victims who were innocent bystanders, right? So like I have worked on both sides of harm. And so I have found that there is a cycle that's going on in community, and it's based on a proverb that says, an African proverb that says, the child not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, those who have caused violence have been traumatized. They have not been embraced, right? In schools, homes, and neighborhoods is how we define village. But there was also like a collective community rejection of them, which I have found through my work, which caused them to like dive into a subculture, like a street subculture. And this trauma then manifested into violence for a variety of reasons. This violence hurt the surrounding community. Right? Every day, violence hurts the surrounding community. And so they often push these folks to the margins of society, and it becomes a us versus them dynamic, which only exacerbates the issue because then folks are feeling rejected even more. And what happens is both kind of groups dehumanize each other, which also, again, exacerbates the issue. So the Village Revival Project works to bring these groups together, share their experiences with each other so that they can humanize this relationship between each other, but also take accountability for the harm that they have caused each other, right? And then they work together to build social cohesion within the community.
This episode is brought to you by DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your process, elevates your donations, and ensures a user-friendly experience for your supporters. Explore the world of simplified, seamless fundraising at DonorBox.org today.
For listeners, we talk about, as a social trailblazer, this is really what makes the model and, got my to the Village Revival Project is, I know you and I both have worked in violence prevention, and there's just something missing about, right, ending the cycle and taking ownership. And so you talk a little bit more about kind of what makes the Village Revival Project different from other things we've seen.
Mm-hmm. So one is the fact that like violence intervention and prevention is working to reduce violence, right? Specifically. This is not a necessarily coined or even funded like a CV. We call it CVI for short. It's not necessarily a CVI program because we are working really to build social cohesion. If social cohesion, which I know in my heart that social cohesion will reduce violence, however, that is really our main goal. So our goal is to build trauma awareness and resilience, improve interpersonal perceptions among these two groups, and then build social cohesion. And again, if we do those three things well, then we will reduce violence. I am located in the city of Newark, New Jersey. We do have a national CDI model. We also have a really rich arts culture here. But right now, the ecosystem that we're dealing with serves these two groups separately. Mm-hmm. Right. And so this program really brings these folks together, brings returning citizens back from the margins, not just supporting returning citizens and getting a job and getting a house. And that's pretty much like what reentry services look like right now. And they're not, it's not really social cohesion efforts that are intentional as this, and then are through art. Art and public safety in my city are wanting to marry and talk and begin to work together, but haven't yet. So this is also pretty unprecedented in my area for anti-violence work and the arts community to come together in healing.
And why do you think, so the arts community, why do you think art specifically is the modality, or what, you've decided to focus on, and what could that do?
Yeah, because I believe that, so the specific kinds of art that we're doing, we are doing painting, theater, music, poetry, and photography. So those are our modalities that we're focused on. We want these groups to see each other, hear each other, feel each other in a deep way. And so sometimes art helps us to see each other in a way that words cannot necessarily describe. Because oftentimes these groups, again, I've been a middleman for years, these groups are saying the same things. They've both been victimized in the same ways. They've both endured the same trauma. And so, art allows them to express these truths in a way that, like I said, words can't necessarily accomplish.
Yeah, and I think especially, in reentry situations, again, like using words and like that's a very maybe unsafe space to be in, right? And so art is maybe an easier, safer, more adaptive way to communicate.
Yeah. And that's a great point, just because, again, sometimes also folks have not necessarily connected the dots enough to put language on it. I mean, even us, right? Like everybody in their healing journey, you don't always have language to put on what's going on in there. And so art allows you to unpack it in a non-traditional way.
Oh, I am so excited to follow a little more, and we're going to dive a little deeper, but follow more about what the Village Revival Project is doing. We just walk through a little bit. We're going to jump a little bit, and I want to chat a little more of you as a nonprofit founder. When did you launch the Village Revival Project?
So we started building capacity with our national capacity builder, Equal Justice USA, in 2022. The board of directors started meeting about 2 years ago. And then we publicly launched the concept, the movement, I should say, in last November 2023.
Oh, cool. I think we're recording this right now in almost November 2024. So congratulations on the 1 year mark.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd love to know, as I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I've worked in house and nonprofits. We all know in the nonprofit sector, things do not always go as planned. So especially for listeners that are maybe thinking about launching their organization, or there are a lot of executive director listeners being like, things are not quite working. Can you share a little bit of maybe something in your startup journey that didn't go as planned?
Definitely. And I love that, because I don't think we should gatekeep the struggle. I think we should be transparent about it, when I was reflecting on this, I think that because I have built so many programs from scratch over the course of my career, I was able to stand up programs very quickly. I was able to birth the infrastructure. I had the vision, right? Create the infrastructure, stand it up, staff it, fund it. Let's move on, right? And that was 4 other organizations, right? So this wasn't my vision necessarily. I was doing this for other organizations and leaders. I think I thought at the beginning that this would go much faster. Right. And so I just had to keep reminding myself that like we don't despise humble beginnings, and like we have to remain patient and committed. And you're giving birth to a baby, but you're also like pregnant, but for 9 months before that, right? And then the baby is born, and then you have to raise it, and all of that is a journey and a process. And I think I underestimated how long it would take. And there were moments throughout the journey that I thought we weren't moving fast enough, or I had internal timelines like, well, I'm trying to do this now, right? And like, I've begun to find joy in the process. And I also have been assured that this is bigger than a program. It's a movement. And so like we are right now, just, as so everyone knows where we are, like we are fundraising right now for a pilot cohort. However, for the last few months, we did receive a grant from Prudential Financial, and they are funding a community tour. So we have done film screenings, we've done theatrical stage readings, we've done panels and healing circles and like focus groups. And so we are just engaged community, right? Like, so I say that also to my peers is like, you may have this idea about this vision and how it's supposed to go, but like, you can never go wrong with engaging community and spreading the word of your movement, because a lot of our work is movements, and it's bigger than just a program that needs to be funded.
Yeah. And I think that's something I hear from a lot of founders is, it's interesting for you when you're internal or like running programming, it's like all the resources you have, right? And like when you're starting off, like there's so much in just convening the right stakeholders, right? That's a lot of the work in the upfront. Did you have any struggles getting people, feel free not getting people to the table?
So I would say that like my network, and just because of the nature of where we are as a city, the CBI ecosystem is very strong in Newark, New Jersey. And so my network was like, of course, duh, right? Like, wow, I never saw it from this perspective, but of course, aha, that makes sense, right? So I would say that those who do community work, yes, I have, we are doing focus groups next month with the community at large, and that will be a critical conversation just to see, right, like how the community at large feels about this concept, because there may be, some pushback. But what I have found in general about, this paradigm is a lot of times folks look at, they really want accountability. Accountability, right? Like those who have caused violence need to be held accountable. And I agree, right? I am not over here like heal, but trauma was an excuse, right? Mm-hmm. Trauma and the behavioral manifestation of trauma is an explanation for what occurred. It is not an excuse. And I hold them accountable on a regular basis. We can hold them accountable and engage in healing at the same time. It is not an either or. We can also hold them accountable for their healing, right? Like if your trauma behaviorally manifested in this way, then that's up to you to heal that, because your lifestyle is traumatizing those around you. So I think that's like the only thing that I need to continue to clarify, that I have been the last 10 years or so, is like, okay, well, yeah, healing. Yeah, behavioral manifestation of trauma, but like, that's not an excuse, and they need to be held accountable. And so that is my answer to that, is like, we can do both. They even want to be held accountable. And I say to them, I can hold you accountable, no problem, but we need to heal the root of violence so that we, can remain peaceful. So, yeah.
That's so fascinating, because I hear both in the model of the Village Revival Project and in a lot of your language, this like dual emphasis, I guess, on like the individual on both sides of the equation, also the community as a whole. And I think that's something that the Village Revival Project as a project, which again, like you said, it's bigger than a program or project, but that's something that the model specifically addresses. And I know that's something that sometimes is lacking in community reentry efforts. How do you feel what do you feel a role for community would be in reentry programs? Like, what do you wish was happening that wasn't?
Yeah. I mean, number one is to make sure that community feels or is aware of the commonalities, right? Like in general, like the community at large is not always aware of how much they have in common with returning citizens. And by the way, like, you know, folks who are coming home or have been violent, whether 20 years ago or last night, are all a part of our community. They didn't come from somewhere else and they're coming in here. They are, you know, fathers, mothers, boyfriends, nieces, right? They're our community. And I think that sometimes that us versus them dynamic causes people to lose sight of how much we have in common, both, you know, strength and deficit based. And so the piece about social cohesion is what I think needs to, and mental health and healing, like that is not often incorporated in reentry spaces. It's like, get them a job and they'll be fine. Right. But like, if somebody, you know, and I'll just say like, if somebody is then punching their supervisor in the face because they're unhealed, and then like that job, like how we can get him a million jobs. Right. But like healing and mental health is like, it has to be a priority in the reentry space. But I think the social cohesion piece, you know, our brothers and sisters have been removed from community, right? And then dropped back into community. And some of that perception of them before was negative. And then, you know, this, you know, societal perspective of like them being deemed disposable, right? Especially like older folks, and they're coming home and they aren't necessarily being wrapped back into the fold of the communal ecosystem. So I think reentry to work on social cohesion is how we avoid recidivism, essentially, right? Because that cycle that I described earlier, if rejection is causing violence, right? Fear, shame, grief, broken hearts, if all of that is causing violence, then we need healing and we need social cohesion.
Yes. And I think that I don't know how much I've shared with you, but, you know, my background originally is in adult education, and about a third of the students that we serve were coming out of the system in one way or another. And it was so, I think, heartbreaking to me repeatedly that individuals didn't have their basic needs met. They're coming straight from a super overly structured environment, as you know, and then like required to sit in a classroom in a structured setting with 20 other people they don't know. Of course, that's like for a lot of people that's not an effective reentry. Like you gotta get in there your first 2 weeks. I'm like, well, maybe like basic needs need to be met, maybe some like work done. Yeah. So I'm so grateful as someone that's seen it done, I would say the wrong way. I'm so grateful for the work you do to change the community as a whole, right?
Yeah. So that piece right there, we have definitely factored that in, because I've seen the same thing. It's like people are joining programs but sleeping on a park bench, right?
Exactly.
That's not okay, right? That's not okay. So as they go through the programmatic experience, which is 4 phases, throughout that programmatic experience, all participants receive in-house therapy to guide their insight, reflection, you know, as they're being activated by the experience itself. They're seeing an in-house therapist and then also a case manager. So we are case managing regarding employment, housing, education, basic needs, because I've seen it. We all have seen it probably. And I am not okay with that. Like somebody in your care, but they don't have basic needs met. It's not okay. So we built that into the model for that consideration.
And that's I think a bigger deal as someone coming from the social service sector, that's within the model and not 20 different, right, fragmented things, which is often the case. So that's wonderful. Where do you see the future of the Village Revival Project? You mentioned a little bit way about in the near horizon. What about the future horizon?
Yeah. So, I mean, the near horizon is continuing to fundraise for the pilot cohort. We will continue to engage community. Like I said, it's a movement, right? So wherever that kind of goes, trying to change minds and hearts, however that is done. Scaled model. which I kind of see as like 3 to 5 years, 2 to 5, depending on the thing. But some of the scaled pieces of the model is, number one, all participants become leaders of the model, right? So they're called the revivalists. And so they then turnkey the model in other settings where harm took place. And so that is definitely kind of like first on the list in regards to scale. Right now, we're serving returning citizens. We will be returning citizens. However, a scaled model does include active, folks who are causing harm actively. And again, here in the city, we already have intervention pieces of our ecosystem. So those folks are not hard to find and engage. So a scaled model does look like that. So those who have caused violence last night are engaging in this program experience. And then the last is national, right? Like we are trying to plant this model nationally, providing TA, but also really getting into the communities. And not like me coming to a community to run it, but like us assessing and assessing their dynamic, which could be very different, but this us versus them dynamic, what does it look like in your city? And two, who are the indigenous leaders that are already there that could then take on this project? And I would just help support capacity building. But that is definitely, we're looking at 3 to 5 years, this model being turnkey nationally.
Awesome. Well, I am a big fan of Lee. I'm a big fan of you. I'm a big fan of the work, the Village Revival Project, the future work, the current work. I'm so excited to see where, I believe, what did you call it again? Your next stage, which is a community tour. Is that correct?
The community engagement tour. Yes, that's what we're engaged in now.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so we were funded by the Prudential Financial. And so our first event was a film screening where we screened a documentary, had a panel discussion. And that audience, because of the documentary, it was called The Work, which is really powerful. You're familiar with?
Yeah.
Okay. That was a life-changing documentary. And a friend recommended to me, and I was like, everyone I know needs to see this. But it was VRP specific because outside folks came into the prison and they did group therapy. And they ended up finding they had more in common than different, right? Despite initial, questions by the outside folks. So we showed the documentary, and it was mostly like local healers that were in that audience. We then did an event at the Newark Arts Festival, which is a really big deal here in this city. And we hosted an event in an art gallery. And so within that art gallery, we did a stage reading, a panel discussion, and a healing circle. And it was very impactful because that audience, we're mostly artists and art educators and like engaging the arts community in a way. And they don't necessarily do violence work. Right. So they've never like quite known this dynamic or has been able to hear, for example, some of the panelists and what they said in their truths, like and stuff that we kind of know doing this work, but they didn't. And their minds were very changed by the end of the event. There were definitely light bulbs that went off. And then, our third event will be focus groups. So as of until January till January, we're doing those events funded by Prudential.
Awesome. Well, Alia, I want to thank you for taking time today to share about yourself as a human in the Village Revival Project. Also want to thank you for being really a social innovator and trailblazer, which is what we're all about as social trailblazers. I'm so excited. I'm following your work. I'm so excited for the future of the Village Revival Project. And I know for a lot of listeners, we are eager to see kind of like how the model plays out so we can hopefully bring it to our communities as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, for listeners who want to know more information or connect with you or learn more about the Village Revival Project, where can they connect?
So they can definitely connect on our fabulous website that was made by you and your team, Kelly, Nonprofit Marketing. And so that is www.thevillagerevivalproject.org. And then also Instagram, The Village Revival Project, and Facebook, The Village Revival Project. I also am on LinkedIn. And so I continue to share about this work as well as my consulting work with Seeds and Berries. boundaries.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Social Trailblazers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who are passionate about making a difference. Special thanks to our sponsor, Donor Box, for supporting this podcast and the incredible work of nonprofits everywhere. Join us next time as we continue to dive deep into the motivations of the change makers shaping our world. Until then, keep trailblazing.